I got into Stanford Med with a 4.0 science GPA and a top 1% MCAT score, but I was rejected from 14 out of the 15 original programs I applied to. Here's what I was missing and why perfect stats almost weren't enough. Let me take you back to my second year of college. In my mind, I'd already failed once, so I had wanted desperately to get into Princeton University for undergrad, but my SATs were not good enough. I'd had this deep insecurity of my own inadequacy, and I'd sort of set my sights on getting into Princeton, I think as a way of trying to make myself feel better about myself. I'd learned my lesson though, that standardized tests were important and it was something that could be studied for. And so this time I wanted to make sure that I would do everything right. Although I didn't get into Princeton, I did end up going to a small liberal arts school, and I was really determined to prove myself. I've always really enjoyed learning. And as a consequence, I think that for me, studying was something that oftentimes was very enjoyable. I mean, obviously, there's times where you just have to grind, but oftentimes I really did enjoy what it is that I was learning. And so I ended up with a 4.0 for my math science GPA. I think my overall GPA was like a 3.95. After my second year of college, I took the MCAT, right? So I had taken all of the prerequisites in order to take the MCAT at the time, and I ended up scoring in the top 1%, which for me was a huge accomplishment because I'd previously thought I'm not a good test taker. And so I had specifically worked on making myself into the kind of person who would do better on exams. I also got a physics award. Like I was one of the, I think there was like 3 physics awards given out by the physics department, and I was one of them. And I was the only one that didn't go on to major in physics. And so I had a pretty strong academic record. In my head, I was thinking, okay, this time the stats wouldn't be the problem. Like this wouldn't be the thing that would hold me back. And around this time, I discovered MD PhD programs. And so there was a couple people ahead of me in college who had done an MD PhD program. And there was one in particular that I really looked up to. And I was like, I really want to be like this person. Like he's really confident, he's really smart, he's doing research, he's, following his curiosities, and he's able to do the medicine thing. In my mind, this was like the elite path in medicine. And I sort of told myself, if I could become an MD PhD, I don't know that I was saying this sort of explicitly to myself, but I think there was a part of me that thought if I could do this, it really would sort of say that feeling of insecurity, that feeling of inadequacy that I think had, in many ways driven me to try to get into Princeton in the first place for undergrad. With these stats, I had learned from my mistakes. After my second year, I had almost a perfect GPA and I'd had a perfect math science GPA. And so I thought, I've learned, I've evolved, or so I thought. And so by the time junior year rolled around, I had started the application process and I was feeling actually quite confident. Everyone was telling me, like, you've got everything, right? You've got the grades, you've got really good scores. I had some awards. So what I did was I applied to 15 MD PhD programs, including Stanford and Harvard and WashU and Baylor and many other top programs that you've heard of, because I was pretty confident in my ability to get in. I think I had a couple sort of like safety schools, things that I'd considered to be safety schools, like my home state of Minnesota and things like that. I was pretty ambitious with the programs that I had applied to. This brings us to the next part of my story, which is the collapse. I sent in the applications and then there was nothing. So week after week, I would refresh my email. And in my head, I was thinking, I've got a perfect GPA. I've got, a top 1% MCAT score. I've got awards, and the silence was deafening. I don't know exactly what it is that I was thinking, but I didn't expect what happened, right? I don't know that I was expecting a flood of interviews, but at least some, right? I had spoken with people in my school who had been a little bit ahead of me, and they had said, there were some places that they didn't get interviews, but there were other places that they did. And I had at least some expectation because my stats compared pretty favorably to theirs. I know that I had a better MCAT score and I had better grades. And so I was like, I don't understand. Like, why is this not working for me? All these other people that have applied to MD PhD programs, they were getting many more interviews than me. But for me, it was nothing. It was like crickets. And so I had this creeping terror of, what am I doing wrong? Even more, it was, what is wrong with me? I had to watch while peers who had, on the surface, not as good of stats get many more interviews than I was getting. And I was just really confused. I thought to myself, I did everything that they said to do, and then the rejections started coming in. I remember one specific morning sitting at my laptop, staring at another rejection email. And it was like all of those feelings of inadequacy, all of those doubts, all of those feelings of I'm just not good enough, just came flooding back to me. So I got an interview at Baylor, and I actually got rejected from a couple MD PhD programs right off the bat, which I'll talk about more. But one of them was actually Stanford. They rejected me from their MD PhD program immediately, and so did WashU in St. Louis. And they put me in their MD pool. And so I actually got a couple interviews from that, because they didn't interview me as an MD PhD candidate, but they did interview as an MD candidate. And so this was really high stakes. I have got to do this well, which made it even worse. And so I remember they had us do these mock interviews, and I remember getting so nervous that I was sweating through, it's like if you get nervous, like sometimes you'll sweat through like, your armpits. Like I was actually sweating through like the front of my shirt. I was so nervous. And I remember the interviewer, he was a professor at my school, in the chemistry department, where that was what I majored in. He said, I think he was trying to be nice, but he said something to the extent of, I've never seen someone who looks so good on paper who has such a hard time in interviews. And he was right. I mean, like it was like objectively, I was a mess. And I just felt this really immense pressure of like, I need them to like me. I have so few interviews, like I need to make this work. And so here I was. I had what I thought was as good of a stats as I could have possibly hoped for. And I had just these rejections piling up. I had 14 rejections at that point. Everything was riding on these few interviews. So here's the twist that ultimately was the saving grace. So as I mentioned, Stanford and WashU rejected me from the MD PhD pool, but they did move me to the regular MD applicant pool. So for those 3 interviews, I had just like this crash course in how to get better at interviewing. And if you are interested in learning more about my approach to interviews, be sure that you watch until the end and let us know in the comments if you want a separate video on this. But the basic idea was that I improved dramatically because instead of focusing on myself and trying to make them like me, I learned that an interview is actually much more a process of discovery and of trying to understand more of them and learn more about them. And that I wasn't really trying to make them like me by sort of trying to impress them, but instead it was more a matter of connecting with them by asking the right questions and sort of influencing the place that the conversations went. Ultimately, I got into Baylor's MD PhD program, and I got into Stanford and WashU for their MD programs. So for all 3 of the places that interviewed me, I did get in, but I was rejected from 14 of the 15 MD PhD programs that I originally applied to. And so what I want to tell you next is what I learned from this process and what I hope you can take away from this so that you don't go through nearly the same kind of pain and suffering that I had to go through. It took me months, if not years, to really figure out what happened. What nobody told me, or probably more accurately, what I was probably too afraid to find out, is that MD PhD programs weren't necessarily evaluating me on the stats that I thought that they were going to care about. Instead, what I realized afterwards is that they were evaluating me on really just one major question, which is, will this person actually do research in the future? Will they actually be an excellent physician, scientists? And so I think what had happened is that I had in part sort of listened to bad advice, and in part I think I had had too much of a confirmation bias. And so there were a lot of sort of PhDs at my school, right, like the professors and other people who had said, oh, you'll be fine, right? Because they hadn't seen a lot of people who had had the combination of both the grades and the MCAT that I had had of the MD PhD applicants that we'd had previously in my school. And so I think that they had just assumed that that was enough. Again, honestly, what I hadn't really sought out was the information that research experience really was the key differentiator. And when I say that I should have sought it out, what I mean is that I think I was just hearing what it is that I wanted to hear, right? It's sort of like confirmation bias in action. There's the phrase, what got you here won't get you there. I had thought that because the big problem, or at least my perceived problem for why it is that I got rejected from so many of my top schools that I'd applied to for undergrad, was that I didn't have good test scores, right? I had thought that, oh, okay, well, that's the thing. I'd sort of over-fixated on that and overcorrected for that. And I hadn't really taken enough time to realize that there was a lot more to this process than met the eye. Most importantly, I didn't do the uncomfortable work of seeking contrary opinions, which I'll talk more about later. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, I realize that MD PhD programs have one major fear, which is that you'll take their funding, right? You'll get all of your medical education paid for, you'll get your MD, and then really never touch a pipette again. There are so many people that I know from Stanford who did research, they did their PhD, they came in, they'd had huge amounts of research experience, and then they are mainly clinicians. And again, like, I think it's the right thing that they did for their life. There's a lot of reasons why research is very, very, very difficult. If I think about this from the program directors or the admissions committee standpoints for these MD PhD programs, I think that they probably are looking at, like how many of their graduates don't go on to things like dermatology, right? Like clinical practice, but actually how many of their graduates go on to actually being truly clinician scientists. My guess, again, and having talked to a lot of people, is that they don't want you to just get the PhD and then run. And so for me, I had pretty minimal research from my small school. I had, I think, 0 publications at that point. I had done what was, I think, reasonable research for someone that was coming from a small liberal arts school, but I didn't have any sort of awards. I had 0 publications. I didn't really present at any sort of conferences or things like that. I didn't understand that this was disqualifying. Other students, the peers that I had talked about, who had worse stats than me, but had had sort of more interviews, they had, in retrospect, lots more research. They had actually had real publications. They had gone to conferences and presented. It was clear to me on the when I went to the MD PhD interview at Baylor, just how much of a gap there was between me and so many of the other candidates. I was talking to one person who had gone to, I think, Penn or like an Ivy League school, and she was telling me about all of the background research that she had done on MD PhD programs, how much specific knowledge she had about those programs, and comparing all of these top programs that had rejected me. And I remember just thinking like, wow, I mean, there is just this whole world that I just wasn't even aware of, that I didn't make myself aware of. It was like I realized that I was playing a game without really understanding the rules. And so I thought a lot about, like, how did I get to this point, right? How did I go in with such a critical lack of understanding of the process and what it is that I needed, and just not understand what was going on? Looking back, I think that one of the biggest issues that I had was that the questions that I would ask people of, like, am I ready, or is this a good idea, or things like that, they were designed to get the answer that I wanted. I would ask something like, do you think I have a shot? Or, how strong of an application do you think I have, or things like that. But really just hoping that they would tell me, yeah, oh no, you're great. Oh, you're gonna be fine. Whereas really what I should have asked was something like, hey, be brutally honest. Like, what am I missing? What would be the reason? They call it like a premortem. A premortem is different from a postmortem, which is like after someone's died, you want to, reflect back on like what happened that caused them to die, right? A premortem is like, let's imagine that the worst case scenario happened. What was the reason? What was the critical thing that we missed or didn't do that caused that horrible thing to happen, right? If I had just asked myself, or if I'd gone to a few mentors and said, let's say that I get rejected from everywhere, what's going to be the reason? And if I'd asked that question early enough, and if I had been honest with myself about it and really been open to hearing the answer, I think that the results would have been drastically different. Reflecting back, I think part of it was that I was afraid to reach out to actual MD PhD students, right? I didn't know a lot of them. I'm pretty introverted, and I was very shy at that time. And so it was very difficult for me to reach out to many people. I just didn't know a lot of people. I didn't really step outside of my comfort zone to try to find that information. I think a big part of that was, again, I had this sense of inadequacy. Like I didn't feel like I was good enough. And so I was afraid of hearing that kind of confirmation. I was afraid of hearing that I wasn't good enough. Ironically, that triggered that sense of inadequacy that much more, right? Because I didn't seek out that information. I didn't actually have a great game plan going into it, but it was like I was avoiding the pain in the present moment, and I ended up having a lot more pain in the future. I put in hundreds of hours perfecting my MCAT, but I didn't spend the maybe 10 hours having uncomfortable conversations that literally would have changed everything. Ultimately, I got into Stanford Med despite myself, not because of my strategy. My perfect stats got me in through a side door that I didn't even know existed. But the stress and the rejections and the confusion, all of that could have been avoided. Ultimately, I was very glad about where it is that I ended up. I think that there were so many doors. I'm so grateful that Stanford rejected me early from the MD PhD pool and considered me and accepted me into their MD applicant pool. But it was a lot of pain, and there was a lot of things that I think could have been avoided. Not necessarily with a higher MCAT, not necessarily with more studying, but with having the courage and humility to step outside of myself and to seek out the right mentor who would have not been afraid of telling me the truth that I myself was afraid to hear. So what are the major takeaways so that you can learn from my mistakes? So the first is that perfect stats are oftentimes necessary to get into really good schools, but they're definitely not sufficient. What I wish that someone had told me was that perfect stats may open doors, but they don't tell you which doors to walk through. Ultimately, if we reverse engineer this and try to solve it from the perspective of admissions committee, right? Stats are really, they're kind of more like table stakes, right? They'll get you considered, but depending on the path that you want to take, there's different kind of signals that they're going to emphasize more or less. In this specific case, research experience is the signal that they care about. For MDs, it was more of the things that I typically thought of when I thought of applying to medical school, like clinical experience, narrative, your mission, and then things like your stats. In my case, I optimized for the wrong variables because I never really asked what variables mattered the most. I didn't spend the time to really figure that out. And I was trying to solve a different problem. I think that, to be honest, I was pretty confident in my stats. I was like, wow, I've done really, really well. I scored in the top 1% on the MCAT after only my second year of college. And so I was like, just applying to the MD pool, I was like, no, like I should try to figure out what's sort of beyond that. I didn't really apply because I really was certain that I wanted to do an MD PhD program. I was certain that I wanted to be a physician scientist. I think I applied because, if I'm really, really, really honest, I wanted the marker of saying that I was an MD PhD. And I think that rightfully so, I think that those programs rejected me because ultimately, when I actually did research, so I took a year off when I was in Stanford to do an HHMI grant where they, basically pay for you to do a year of research, and I chose benchtop research. I realized, oh no, like this actually is not the career that it is that I want to pursue. I have so much respect for the people that do it. It's just not for me. And so I think they made the right decision, right, in rejecting me in all of those, those 14 programs who rejected me. I think that was the absolute right decision because I was not doing it for the right reasons. And so that's the other part is that, I really should have spent more time thinking about like, why am I really doing this, and been honest with myself. My second takeaway would be that it's important to reframe interviews, and not just interviews, but really just the application process in general, in that you're trying to solve a problem. Initially, I thought that interviews were really just about trying to make them like me. And ultimately, that's completely backwards. Ultimately, interviews are about trying to demonstrate that you understand what problem you are solving for them. So for MD, PhD, or MSTP programs, really the question, I think if I had to reframe it now, would be, will this person be an excellent clinician scientist, where they are going to use their PhD really to advance research in a very clinically relevant way. I use the same approach for residency programs, and it helped immensely, right? And so if you think about it for a lot of residency programs, particularly top residency programs, it's, is this person going to thrive in our environment, serve our patients well, and ultimately be a leader in their field? Oftentimes they have a pretty broad sort of view of that, although oftentimes residency programs, particularly in academic institutions, tend to focus more on like, they're going to be a leader academically. And then for jobs, it's like, will this person make my life easier, or will this person solve this particular problem well? Instead of trying to perform, which is why I was like sweating through the front of my shirt, right? Ultimately, it became more about trying to figure out, okay, what is their problem? What can I do? How can I serve them? How can my mission align with what it is that they're trying to accomplish? And then it became more of a conversation. It became less about me trying to prove myself, trying to impress them with my statistics or, my grades or things like that. Ultimately, when I'm trying to impress someone, I'm gonna get really, really anxious. But if I'm just trying to demonstrate value or showing how it is that I can solve someone's problem, I'll be a lot more confident. And my final takeaway is to find a mentor who will tell you what you don't want to hear. The most valuable mentor isn't the one who makes you feel good, it's the one who actually makes you face reality. I think for a variety of reasons, I had surrounded myself with people who would give me reassurance. I don't know if it's just that they themselves are the kinds of people that give reassurance, or I was just, in the way that I was asking them questions or in the way that I was talking to them, they could probably sense it, is my guess. One of my favorite phrases is pain now or pain later. And so I was avoiding the pain in that present moment, and it felt, good that they were sort of telling me, oh yeah, everything's gonna be great. Oh, you're such a strong candidate. But ultimately, it cost me a lot. And so a real mentor would have said something like, hey, your research is weak. This is what you should do about it, right? Either don't apply to an MD PhD program, like just do an MD program at a place that's gonna have strong research, or just get more research, right? It would have been uncomfortable, but again, it would have been pain now as opposed to the pain later that really, really hurt. I think ultimately what I think I needed was to face my imposter syndrome, right? I was terrified that someone would confirm my worst fear, that, if I asked them a real question, that they would tell me in not so many words that I wasn't good enough. And so the only questions that I ended up asking were the ones that felt safe, where I would already know the answer. But that's not curiosity. That's just self-deception. So the next section is our Q&A section, where we have taken questions that you have submitted and that are common questions about this, so that I can try to address them in one place. First question is, should I still pursue an MD PhD if I don't have much research? Honestly, from my perspective, I think what I should have done for myself, again, I think this is a personal question for everyone, but I think in my particular case, what I really needed to do was to be honest with myself and ask myself, okay, like, why exactly am I doing this? Am I doing it for reasons of intrinsic value, where it's like, I really want to be a clinician scientist, I really want to do research for the rest of my life, and I am certain of this? Or am I doing it because I think having MD PhD after my name sounds cool? If I'm brutally honest with myself, I think that in retrospect, right, with the benefit of having years and years and years of perspective, I think that the MD PhD title mattered more to me than the actual desire of wanting to do, of knowing for a fact that I wanted to do research for the rest of my life. The next question is, how do I know if my mentor is giving me good advice or just being nice? Ooh, that's a really good one. I think it has to do with the way that you ask questions. Part of it is that, like, if you know someone for a long time, you'll kind of learn their tells. So for example, I have a mentor who is just a really just genuinely nice guy. He's extremely successful. And so when he gives advice, he's not like super direct. Like, he'll never sit me down and say, look, like, you're really messing up, you shouldn't do this. But he will give suggestions, and he'll say, oh yeah, you know what you should do? The next thing you should do is like this. And he'll say it once, and if I don't listen to him in that moment, it's not like he's gonna push. Because I think there are some people, and I've definitely fallen into this trap, who will sort of want to be right, in the sense of they want to be the person that was right, as opposed to genuinely being interested in helping someone and telling them something that will move them forward. Oftentimes those kinds of people, like, I've gotten advice from people like that, where if I don't do what it is that they say, it's almost like it's a personal affront to them. In the case of this close mentor, he doesn't do that, right? He is doing it genuinely because he wants to help me. And so I have to sort of know. And so part of this is just, I know through experience. I've known him for years now. And so there have been multiple times where he's told me something and he's, you know, I've kind of like brushed it off, and it's like, no, I'll justify why I shouldn't do that. And then I'll find out, you know, months or sometimes even years later, like, oh yeah, no, he was totally right. And so part of it is just learning through experience, like, to read it. I guess the other thing that you can do though is just ask the right questions, right? And so if I'd asked the sort of pre-mortem question of, hey, let's say that this goes awfully, right? Like, I hope this doesn't happen, but I want to be prepared. So what would be the reason? Like, what do you think would be the number one reason if I were to do this thing and it went awfully? Like, what do you think that thing would be, just given all of your experience? And oftentimes, if you ask it that way, then I think most people would feel much more comfortable giving that answer. And oftentimes, I think that question tends to do a good job of sparking the right kinds of advice. The next question is, what should I do if I'm already in the application cycle and realizing I'm missing something? That was basically the situation that I found myself in. I think that one thing that helped me a lot was to lower the stakes. Now, granted, I had 3 interviews out of, 15 programs that I applied to. And so I was feeling really, really high stakes. One thing that I found really helpful though, was to try to lower the stakes and say, okay, well, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? And then I said, okay, well, the worst possible thing that could happen is I just get rejected everywhere. And most people will stop at that point, right? I used to just stop and say, oh my gosh, like, that's so horrible. Oh my gosh, and I would kind of catastrophize and think like, oh, well, my life is gonna be over. But actually, once you ask yourself why, what would be the worst case scenario, then say, okay, well, then what would I actually do? And imagine yourself in that situation. So then I would say, okay, well, the worst case scenario is I get rejected everywhere. What would I do? In that situation, I would probably just apply the next year, right? And I would seek a lot more advice and outside perspective to figure out what it is that I was missing, and use that information to, recalibrate for the time after, right? Either I spend a year and I just get a bunch of research, or I realize like, hey, I'm doing this for the wrong reasons. I should just apply to regular MD programs. And so the reason why I find this so valuable is that when you put really high stakes on things, like I coach people for the USMLEs, which is usually the highest stakes tests that doctors take in their entire life. Oftentimes when people put higher sort of pressure on themselves, they do worse. So we'll see people underperform on their real test, especially when they're like, this is it, I have to do this or nothing. And so you want to sort of lower those stakes. And one of the best ways of doing that is realizing that, oh, okay, if the worst case does happen, it's actually not so bad. My life is not over. And there's actually A, B, and C things that I could do thereafter. The next question is, how did you deal with the imposter syndrome once you got to Stanford? There's a quote in Memoirs of a Geisha, which I'm going to butcher, but it's something like, adversity is like a strong wind that will tear everything from you but that which is your core. And I think that that was true for me. I actually think that it wasn't necessarily that I dealt with the imposter syndrome once I got into Stanford. I actually think that entire process was so painful, and I had to do so much soul searching from that plus, you know, the whole wanting to get into Princeton and getting rejected. I think that it made me realize, like, oh no, I'm seeking out external validation, and it's just this never-ending hamster cycle for me. And I realized, I think in college, that something like feeling like I wasn't good enough was an assumption that I was making. Like in math, right? There are certain things, they call them, I think, axioms, where it's like, you can't prove it one way or the other. You just have to accept that it's true. I think one axiom is something so basic, like 2 + 2 is 4, right? Like just simple kinds of things like that, or 1 = 1. There's like an identity axiom. But there are certain things where you can't actually prove it, even for something like mathematics. There's just assumptions that underlie it. Science has a lot of assumptions too. Empiric testing, which is basically the basis of scientific inquiry, is based on an assumption, right? Which is that the natural world can be observed repeatedly through repeated experiments, or something like that. And so what I realized in studying different forms of thought was that I had an assumption, not something that was provable. And so if I assume that I'm not good enough, then there's nothing that I can do to dislodge that belief. And so what I realized is that, oh, okay, no, I actually have to start with the assumption that I am good enough, and then I'll be able to find evidence, right? Just like I'd been finding evidence before of all the things that made me not good enough. I had to then change that around and say, no, I am good enough. And then I allowed myself to then see evidence for me being good enough. And I think, by the time that I got to Stanford, I think that I'd done enough reflection. I journaled a ton. I went through lots of therapy, but I think that had helped pretty substantially. I got into Stanford Med, and I'm grateful for that. But if I could go back, I would trade a few of my MCAT points for an honest mentor who would have told me exactly what it is that I needed to hear, and the attitude to be open to that. So please find that person and be that person for others when you can. And remember, the hardest conversations to have are usually the ones that are most important. And if you're interested in learning more about what it is that happened once I got to Stanford and why it is that I ultimately left medicine, even after matching into Harvard MGH for anesthesiology, be sure to click on this video.